Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the first Claudia Miller Ignite series on animal welfare. Hi, I'm your host, Joseph Grove, for tonight. Appreciate you tuning in. I think you'll find what we have to say very interesting. Glad you're with us. After this broadcast, tomorrow you will receive an email with a link to it, so you can watch it again or share it with your friends, and it will have all of the links we mentioned today. First of all, I want to say a word or two about Animal Wellness Action. If you've come to us through another promotional means and are learning about us for the first time, be aware that we are a 501c4 organization. We have it as our mission to help animals by promoting laws, regulations at the federal, state, and local levels that forbid animal cruelty. We work to enforce existing animal cruelty and wildlife protection laws. We believe that helping animals helps us all. And you can find out more about us at animalwellnessaction.org. Our first speaker today will be our president, Wayne Pacelle. He is a two-time author of New York Times best-selling books on animal welfare, and he has led efforts to pass 1,500 state laws for animals, more than 100 federal laws and amendments, 30 ballot initiatives, and more than 500 corporate agreements. Also on the show, we're not sure whether there's been a conflict in Congress, so whenever you're dealing with a member of Congress, schedules are subject to change, but we do expect an appearance by Representative Troy Carter. Oh, he is. Oh, excellent.
I am here, sir.
All right. Well, very good, Representative Carter. I tell you, I would have been heartbroken had you not joined us, so I'm glad you're here. I was just saying a few words about you before Wayne introduces you formally in a minute. He is the representative from Louisiana's 2nd Congressional District, and he introduced the ADD SOY Act, which is the main focus of our webinar. So thank you, sir. Glad you were with us. He serves on two very important committees on Capitol Hill, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and the Homeland Security Committee. So it's a real honor to have you with us, sir. Thank you. Dotsie Bosch, if you are an Olympic sport devotee, you will have heard her name. She is the executive director of an organization called Switch for Good. She'll tell us more about that. She is a cyclist who medaled at the 2012 Olympics in London with 8 national championships, 2 Pan American gold medals, and a world record. I get tired just reading that off. That's amazing, Dotsie. Glad you're with us too. And she's named one of the 20 most influential vegans in the world by Veg News magazine. And then Dr. Lakshman Mulpuri is with us. He is the chief executive of Plants Nourish. He developed the first ever mandatory plant-based medical curriculum for first-year medical students at Wayne State. He's also been featured in Veg News, the Netflix special Forks Over Knives, and numerous newspapers and televisions have also focused on his important work. So thank you again. Thank you, guests. And with that, I will stop this presentation on the computer and turn it over to Wayne, who will say a few words and then cue right up with Representative Carter.
Joseph, thank you very, very much. Again, I'm Wayne Pacelle. I'm just so glad that you're joining us today. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm president of Animal Wellness Action and the Center for Humane Economy. We're excited to present this webinar about the dairy industry, about the National School Lunch Program, and the intersection of these issues. I'm so pleased that Representative Troy Carter has joined us. Representative Carter is really a hero of mine. He was a great state senator in Louisiana. He was the leading animal welfare advocate in that state for years when he served the people of Louisiana. He was elected in a special election after Representative Cedric Richmond went to the White House working for the Biden administration. Troy ran for that open seat and he won it in a competitive primary. And he won, and it took about a week and a half, and he passed a bill on the House floor to ban the slaughter of horses for human consumption. He did not waste 1 minute, and he has been running hard on animal welfare because, as you'll hear in a moment, he's extremely passionate about this. Dotsie and I approached him on this issue of the milk mandate in our public schools, and we presented it to him, and he's just been running hard ever since. So, Congressman Carter, thank you so much for all you've done in the state of Louisiana. Now you're doing in the United States Congress. You've quickly emerged as one of the top leaders on animal welfare, and we're so glad to have you.
Wayne, thank you very much. And thank you all for being here. It's real easy when you get to work with incredible advocates like Animal Wellness, incredible people with a wealth of knowledge, passion, and commitment. I've been blessed my entire career as a member of the New Orleans City Council, a member of the Louisiana House of Representatives, a member of the Louisiana State Senate, and now a member of Congress, to have been surrounded by great people and great activists who share my love of animals and humanity, and doing the right thing, quite frankly. I'm very blessed to be doing exactly what I love to do, and very fortunate to have had the opportunity to work with Wayne and his team on multiple issues. But the one we're most excited about now is one that I'm very pleased that we're getting traction. Wayne, I was again today with Secretary Vilsack, and had an opportunity to remind him of where we are. And every time I see him now, I'm certain, thinks SOY Act, because that's been my pressing issue with him. But I was in a meeting this morning with Senator Durbin on another set of issues, and Senator Cory Booker was in that meeting. So I had an opportunity to press him again, and we're working angles on various strategy items on how we can advance this issue to get it over the goalposts as fast as possible, rather as a standalone or as an amendment in the Farm Bill. But the significance of SOY Act is to make sure that our young people who go into the classroom every day and are forced to digest something their bodies simply can't digest. And now imagine for a second, if you will, a kid who in many cases, that lunch will be the only meal, or at a minimum, perhaps, the most nutritious meal they will have of the day. Yet they will eat their food and then guzzle down a carton of milk for those who continue to try, not to mention those who discard it because they may not have isolated or figured out that they're lactose intolerant, but they know it doesn't work for them. Many kids still try. Now, 90% of Asian Americans lactose intolerant, 75% Hispanics, African Americans lactose intolerant, 65% Hispanics lactose intolerant. When you look at those incredible numbers, this should have been fixed a long time ago. This is not something that should still be lingering on. When you think about the physical effect of what happens when your body attempts to digest something the body doesn't want, it is poison, albeit not fatal, but very uncomfortable, very distracting. Now imagine that child trying to drink milk, and now they're in the classroom and they raise their hand to go to the restroom, and they may have already gone. The teacher says, no, you can't go to the restroom. You're just playing around. And that kid is sitting there with his or her belly bubbling. Imagine the discomfort. And God forbid if they had an accident, imagine the embarrassment and the teasing that comes with that and the social ills associated with it. But beyond that point, the kid can't possibly concentrate. And then someone gets the bright idea that Johnny or Mary is a slow learner. And then they end up in a classroom where expectations of them are low. They're no longer pushed because they now believe that there's not much expectation to come out of Johnny or Mary, when in fact, Johnny and Mary could be the high achiever they were intended to be had they only been diagnosed and were offered an alternative to milk. Soy is the nutritional equivalent of milk. It is easier on the body. It is less chance of having the impact that milk has and lactose. So the SOY Act is very much a common sense bill, and it seems like there should be a no-brainer, except some would continue to fight the old way of doing things. Now, make it very clear, this is not an attack on the dairy industry. This is fighting for what's best for our young people. And I'm proud to say that almost before every group that I speak, people are astonished. People are shocked when they hear the alarming statistics of people who are impacted by lactose intolerance. They're further shocked when they find out that these young people have no alternative. So they continue to consume something that their bodies can't digest. I am motivated and optimistic that we're going to have success one way or the other. We have Republicans, we have Democrats, we have House and Senate members excited, and Secretary Vilsack has been working with us, albeit not as fast as I like, not as definitive as I like, but we're moving in the right direction. I'm confident that this will be something that we will be able to bring to fruition and bring comfort and peace and health to thousands of kids across our country in the public school system who have no alternative when they go to have their lunch. And I want to again thank Wayne and Animal Wellness for allowing me to carry this bill and bringing this to me and being such a wealth of knowledge in this space. And if I will, I want to just take a moment to say, you guys do great work. And I am honored to be associated with you. And for all of our friends online, thank you for the great work that you do. Help us to continue to preach the gospel, to continue to use your platforms, use your knowledge, use the people that you have influence with, because I know you do, to talk about the fact that this could be an absolute game changer for people's academic lives, social lives, and physical, because they're all tied together in something as simple or as complex as trying to force your body to consume something that it doesn't want and that it can't break down and it can't digest. So thank you for being here. Thank you for allowing me to come and say hi. I apologize for the less than perfect setting. I'm in between meetings. I'm in the car. So I know the lights are flashing because there's a car in front of me with their hazards on. So I look like I'm in a red district or something. So, but God bless you all. And thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions. But again, thanks for having me. Thanks for allowing me and trusting me to carry this very important piece of legislation.
Well, Congressman Carter, thank you. Given your schedule and Congress, this is a major working day for you, and you're obviously in transit. So thank you for taking the time. This is just part of your commitment that you demonstrate, walking right into the Congress and initiating an amendment to ban horse slaughter for human consumption and, really shepherding that through, and now taking the lead on this. You co-sponsored the new animal fighting bill last week. You've been working on the wild horse issue. I mean, there's really no animal welfare issue that you're not really in the forefront on. So thank you so much. We'll let you go and get on with your evening, but really it's we who thank you for your leadership. And this is not some Johnny-come-lately situation. You were doing this in the state Senate and in the state House. So this is just a continuation of your work, and we're really immensely grateful to you.
God bless you guys. Have a great weekend, and we'll be together soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Joseph, I'm going to say a few words to supplement what Congressman Carter said, but you had a couple of housekeeping issues you wanted to attend to.
Thank you, Wayne. I appreciate that. I wanted to let participants know that there is a Q&A button in their Zoom screen. We will be answering questions at the latter part of the webinar. So at about 7:45, we'll get to as many questions as we can. We're scheduled for an hour, but depending upon the questions, I know our panelists are excited to answer them all. So if we do run a couple of minutes over, feel free to stay with us. We'll stay until we're finished. So with that, Wayne, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Joseph. So I want to just remind you why we're here. We're here to discuss important animal welfare issues, and we're also here to highlight the intersection of animal welfare with other important social concerns. When we talk about animal fighting, we talk about the spillover of violence in our communities. Just a week and a half ago, 2 people murdered, 3 people shot and injured at a cockfight in Hawaii. We talk about the intersection of malicious animal cruelty and other forms of social violence. We talk about factory farming and the waste that is, emitted from these factory farms, like hog factories, that pollutes the groundwater and putrefies the air. Our kind of slogan is "Helping animals helps us all," and I've never really viewed animal issues just through a narrow lens. It's about stopping needless violence. It's about stopping, terrible decision making. We've been working on this mink farming issue. We've learned that these mink farms, where these wild animals are kept in factory farms, that they happen to be uniquely vulnerable to viruses, and having the viruses mutate in them, spreading back or spilling over back to humans. There's a huge threat now with the avian influenza outbreak and the mink farms. So just the broader context for our discussion, I want to remind people that we at Animal Wellness Action, maybe a little differently than Switch for Good, which, is really focused on nutrition and health and performance. We really focus on animal welfare, but we embrace these other dimensions of these social problems for animals. And that's really what led us. Dotsie Bausch, who Joseph mentioned, was an Olympian, a medal winner at the Summer Olympics. She told me about this issue that her organization, Switch for Good, was working on. And it was essentially the notion that for decades, the United States government has had a milk mandate in our national school lunch program. Now, our national school lunch program is one of the core nutrition assistance programs for people in need. And kids obviously are by definition, they're still growing. They have very important nutritional needs that need to be met. And some of them come from disadvantaged homes and communities. And the nutrition assistance is obviously very important. That's been a bipartisan sort of issue in the United States for a long time. And the purposes of that nutrition assistance program are worthy, and they're very good. But how it's executed also matters. And sometimes we get off on the wrong foot and we make a course correction. And this program has basically been in place since the mid-1940s, just the post-World War II period. And after our nation, fought a very globally significant war, World War II, to fight Nazism and fascism, we were producing a lot of milk and a lot of other agricultural commodities to supply Americans at home and then our troops abroad. And when our troops came back, there was this notion that we would have a surplus of some of these products and a surplus of cow's milk. So the United States really then, altered some of its national policies and essentially mandated that every kid in the national school lunch program would get a carton of milk on his or her tray. And that's been in place for, nearly 80 years now. Now, we've learned through the years, there are a number of changes that have occurred when it comes to nutrition and food and animal agriculture. And one element which Dr. Mulpuri, I know, will speak about tonight, and that Representative Carter mentioned, is that we're now aware that the science is incontrovertible, that lactose intolerance is very widespread. It certainly afflicts a substantial number of people of European descent, but very high numbers of people of non-European descent, majorities, nearly universal among Native Americans, very high numbers against certain Asian, people of Asian descent, 3/4 of African Americans, a substantial majority of Latinos. And it's a bit incongruous to think that we're giving a staple. So we have a fluid beverage, which is touted as nutritionally important in terms of protein and micronutrients. Yet, perhaps if you just look at the numbers and the large percentage of kids in the school lunch program who are kids of color, perhaps a majority of all of these 30 million kids getting lunch assistance and 15 million kids who get breakfast assistance, a majority of them are lactose intolerant. Now, does it make sense for us to have a monopoly for one industry to basically own the glass or in this case, the carton, so that kids have no choice, we can expect, results to be adverse from a policy that looks like that. So kids getting sick is one derivative of a milk mandate policy. Perhaps millions of kids who get, mild symptoms like a stomach ache or more severe symptoms like vomiting. And that is obviously going to affect them in their schooling, in the education environment. But others, even if they haven't been diagnosed as lactose intolerant, have a sort of intuition. They have their experience. They know that there's a bad outcome when they drink a product that they cannot digest, that they don't have the ability to handle lactose in the milk. And a lot of the kids throw the milk away in the carton. And I was shocked when DOTC showed me a report from the USDA, the US Department of Agriculture itself, that revealed that 30% of the kids, which is about 10 million, throw away the milk in the carton. So they don't even open the thing up and they toss it. That is an enormous issue of food waste, and it has implications in terms of all the energy inputs that go into producing all of that milk, potentially 45 million gallons of milk a year. And then there's the fiscal waste. The United States reimburses school districts to the tune of $1 billion a year for the milk purchases that then go on every kid's tray. It's a lot of trays. It's 30 million trays a day, during the school week. That amounts to a waste of our taxpayer dollars, $300 million a year. And we're dealing with billions of dollars here and billions of dollars there, and people say, well, that's a small amount. When is $300 million a small amount? That's a lot of your tax dollars. It's a lot of our tax dollars. And the way that you address government waste is you address each program. You can't address it collectively very easily. You've got to look at how each of the programs works and then make adjustments. So you're undermining the purposes of the nutrition assistance program. You're making kids sick. You're contributing to food waste. You're wasting taxpayer dollars. Now, I think the milk industry, with its political might, got this going years ago. And because of its political might, it sustained it. And they're really beyond the natural market for their commodity, for their food product. They're trying to extend it beyond the natural reach of their consumer base by having a mandate. And that means we've seen real changes in agriculture that concern me. I was deeply distressed when I learned more than a week ago that 18,000 cows, 18,000 individual lives, animals who experience fear and love and all the wide range of emotions that other mammals do, including humans. An explosion happened at a factory farm in the Texas Panhandle, one of these mega dairy operations. There were 19,000 cows at this facility, overcrowded, difficult to walk around, even if they had enough space to walk around. And 18,000 of them died. They were either burned up or they died from smoke inhalation at one of these factory farms. I mean, that is, we were going on with our lives and they were going through some sort of terror, and an enormous number of animals lost their lives. Now, I'm sure the farmer, hated the idea. I mean, obviously, the owner of that place didn't want that outcome. No one is suggesting that he wanted that outcome. It's terrible for him. It's terrible just as a moral problem that exists in our society. But this is a consequence of this hyperproductivity to reach markets beyond their normal appeal, and to just keep asking more and more of these animals, and to have these small farmers driven out of business, and having these big farms where they're consolidating so much, and they've engineered the cows for incredible productivity that stresses their physical well-being, their physiology, and their foot health and their leg health. So there's an animal welfare dimension to this. That's why Animal Wellness Action is in it. Now, we embrace the concerns about food and nutrition and the health of people and their well-being, but we are also concerned about the animals' well-being. That fire to me was just indicative of some of the problems with factory farming. But I know that Dotsie Bausch, she has an incredible personal story about this issue. And Dotsie, I just want to thank you so much for all of the leadership that you have provided on this issue on behalf of Switch for Good. I know you're just so hardworking and you're so passionate about this, and you obviously have thought about these health and nutrition issues, and really want to thank you for bringing this to me at Animal Wellness Action, the Center for Humane Economy, and just appreciate you so much.
I'm so proud to be a partner in this, and you are the hardworking one. I have followed him around Capitol Hill, and it's exhausting. And I'm an Olympian, and I can barely hang. I mean, the end of the night, now there's dinner. I'm like, please let me go back to the hotel. So you guys just do extraordinary work, and I just couldn't be prouder. And it's an honor to be with everyone tonight that's joining us. And Wayne, when we first started discussing this issue and how we could make a really true impactful change in our school system, I asked you how long it could take to pass a bill. And you just said, well, it could take multiple years. You didn't give it a number, but I said, okay, I think I have the endurance. I often refer to this fight and our work at Switch for Good as my second Olympics, but this time around, it's not for me. It's for the millions of voiceless lives that we all stand up for. But I got to tell you, instead of taking home silver like last time, we will be taking home gold this time around. Trust me. And it's people like you that are here joining us in this webinar that truly keep us in the game. So yes, we collectively will be taking home the gold together. So I'd like to take you guys back to 2010, if I may. I was at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and it was freezing outside. We had just come indoors into the cafeteria after a especially brutal 5-hour wind whipping road ride. And I can't feel my fingers or my toes. And I'm drenched with sweat under the layers of baklavas that I'm wearing and thermal tights. And all I want to do is grab a recovery shake and head into the hottest shower possible. I enter the cafeteria and I kind of wobble over in my cycling cleats to the recovery bar, where I see an ocean of dairy products for me to choose from. And that's it. It's just dairy. It's in the form of whey protein powder for me to mix with whole or low-fat milk. I see yogurt, I see cottage cheese, I see string cheese, and I see, of course, the ultimate in recovery for any human athlete, of course, chocolate milk. The only problem is I have just recently traversed the road to becoming vegan. I had seen some horrifying footage of what animals had to go through to make it to my plate. And just like that, I felt like Neo from the Matrix after he swallowed the red pill. I could never unsee what I had seen. And I had fallen down a rabbit hole of cold, hard truth that would change my life forever. I was stepping into what felt like a really strange, new, and very uncertain reality. And I think I even said to myself out loud, where's the blue pill? I want the blue pill back. I feared it would be a lonely journey because this is 2010. And the only plant-based athlete I'd ever even heard of was Brendan Brazier, who y'all probably know. He's a Canadian ultra marathoner who seemed to be some sort of freak of nature and able to run these breathtaking distances on a plant-based diet. But Brendan was it. And I didn't know of anyone else who'd made what appeared to be a very risky nutritional move. But I felt committed, and little did I know how committed I would later become and dedicate my whole life to speaking up for the voiceless. But that day, that very day, I felt an activist awaken inside of me. In the cafeteria there, I said, hey, Jerry Corn. That was my nickname for the cafeteria guy that I liked the most because he made the most delicious grilled corn on the cob I'd ever tasted. He says back to me, yep, Poppins Rock. That was his nickname for me. I said, Jerry, I'm going to need some plant-based protein on this recovery bar. In fact, in a few years' time, I'm going to bet I won't be the only one asking for it. I can't recover with all this nasty dairy. We need some plant protein, Jerry. Jerry says, Well, you tell me what plant protein is, Poppins, and I'll get it for you. And right there in that moment, I knew this cafeteria was going to never be the same. And today, the athletes who are there in Colorado Springs, that very cafeteria, tell me that same recovery bar is made of mostly plants. Yep, dairy's still there too, but not for long, right? If we have anything to say about it. Joseph, let's go to the next slide. So truth is, not just athletes grew up drinking milk, but most Americans grew up drinking milk because Big Dairy lied to us. Working in collusion with the federal government, Big Dairy sold us the lie that milk does a body good, right? They said, got milk, and made us believe that we needed milk to be healthy and have strong bones. But it's just not true. And it's like when Big Tobacco told us that cigarettes don't kill you. For years, cigarette manufacturers used really slick PR and advertising campaigns. Remember the Marlboro Man? While hiding over 500 studies that proved nicotine was addictive and cigarettes kill. And taking a page from the tobacco industry's playbook, Big Dairy also hides behind slick marketing and lies. Many of you probably know, but some maybe not, that dairy is the leading contributor, a leading contributor, I should say, to heart disease. The #1 killer in America. Over 700,000 Americans died of heart disease just last year. And milk and dairy products are the top source of artery clogging, saturated and trans fats in the standard American diet. And these fats constrict our blood vessels and slow blood flow down to the working muscles, causing hypertension and wreaking complete havoc on the cardiovascular system. And cheese is especially dangerous because it's typically over about 50% fat. Multiple studies have also linked dairy to increased risk of terminal cancer. That's right, I said terminal. More dairy equals more ovarian cancer deaths. Research that was published in 2021 looked at over 3 million people across 34 studies and found that women who consume more dairy increase their risk of dying from ovarian cancer by 32%. Of course, dairy kills cows too, but of course, the dairy industry doesn't kill productive dairy cows. That would be very unprofitable for them. However, after the cows have spent years being forcibly impregnated, having their babies repeatedly stolen, and enduring constant physical and psychological abuse, all dairy cows are killed and processed into beef products years before their natural life expectancy. And in many cases, when dairy cows are considered spent, producing less milk as a result of repeated pregnancies and births, or due to a prolapsed uterus, which literally comes out of the cow with their last baby, they are sold for cheap cuts of beef, many ending up as fast food hamburgers. We can go to the next slide, Joseph. So for decades, we've watched Big Dairy manipulate research and nutritional science to construct billion-dollar marketing campaigns through its marketing arm, Milk Pep. And they're responsible for some of the most popular yet misleading advertising campaigns in history. The Dairy Checkoff program is actually an industry-funded federal program that has a profound impact on what Americans choose to consume. Prompted by the dairy industry, Congress actually created the National Dairy Promotion and Research Board in 1983, whose entire sole purpose was to promote dairy products by way of marketing and nutritional education. But since animal foods are not required to list their nutritional ingredients, we thought we would at least show them to you. So you can show that next slide, Joseph. To fund this effort, the dairy farmers agreed to pay a small fee based on the weight of the milk they sold into this program. And this research program is responsible for targeting low-income communities with some of America's most craveable and least healthy food products, including, you all might remember this, Pizza Hut stuffed crust pizza. Like, it's not enough to have the cheese on the pizza, to stuff the crust with it. And also Taco Bell's quesalupa and quesarito. But wait a minute, the majority of the world's population is unable to digest the lactose in dairy. And I won't go into the percentages because Wayne did a fantastic job doing that. But lactose intolerance, it's really a debilitating condition. And the kiddos that are in school sitting there after they have their breakfast milk and their lunch milk, they're having gas and bloating, and they're having nausea, cramping, diarrhea, stomach pain, and in severe cases, vomiting. And yet Big Dairy continues to market milk and other dairy products to people of color. I was really interested in the history of how marketing dairy foods to children via our school lunch program all got started. And Wayne went into that post-World War II in 1946, when we had so much of a surplus of commodities, and it got dumped on our nation's children. And I'm sure it probably seemed harmless at the time and maybe even helpful. But then in 1952, Brown versus the Board of Education ended segregation in schools. And that would have probably been the time to ask the question if milk was good for all children. But Congress didn't ask that question. And so since 1952, the National School Lunch Program has encouraged children of color to take a carton of milk with their breakfast and with their lunch. And this is just an unjust form of structural racism that we call dietary racism. And we think it's time that Big Dairy and the USDA stopped discriminating against people of color in this way. Pushing cow's milk on lactose-intolerant children greatly inhibits their learning potential. And Representative Carter talked about that. It can set them up for multiple disadvantages as they progress through their educational journey. So Joseph, we can show the last slide, because we're going to talk about solutions, not just the problem. What is the new way forward? Well, it's the ADD SOY Act. And to take you on a journey of why we chose soy milk as the healthy alternative to cow's milk for our nation's children, and to learn about its numerous nutritional benefits, is our friend, Dr. Lakshman Mulpuri, better known as Dr. Lucky. Take it away, Dr. Lucky.
Wow, Dotsie, I've heard your story I don't know how many times, and I'm still constantly enamored by just how much you've endured, and more importantly, how much you've succeeded. Obviously, Wayne, thank you as well for an incredible introduction, and Representative Carter for his efforts in promoting what I think to be what is singularly one of the most important things we can do for disadvantaged communities, which is allowing people to have access to healthy options. And oftentimes when we talk about preventive medicine, when we talk about what can we do more in our communities, a really big part of that is seeing that food is social justice. It is oftentimes a connection that has been obfuscated over the years, but allowing individuals, particularly those who may perhaps need dietary differences than those of their more European counterparts, I think is vital in promoting the health of not only this generation, but future generations of Americans. So Joseph, whenever you're ready, I think I'll take those slides. So we won't go too far into some of the introduction here in the slides, because I think it's been covered very broadly and well by some of the panelists here, but I want to really delve into what does the nutrition look like when it comes to dairy, and what does soy do that's a little different. So obviously the big thing for me personally, myself, is I didn't realize I was lactose intolerant until maybe in my late teens, early 20s, when I switched to plant-based nutrition. I myself had a lot of complications that most people would define now as lactose intolerance, but I myself wasn't aware, to the point where some doctors had feared that I had maybe had Crohn's disease. After I had removed dairy from my diet, and along with improving my diet overall, I haven't had symptoms in nearly 6 to 7 years. And that's just an anecdote. Larger, if we look at the nation overall, almost more than 50 million Americans can't digest lactose. And if you look at the numbers, it is overwhelmingly minorities. Now, you might ask, why is it that a significant portion of our population can't digest lactose? What if I were to tell you that it's actually normal to not be able to digest lactose, and that, in fact, the AMA's recent of 2018 noted that lactose intolerance is, in fact, considered normal? And you'd be hard-pressed to find anywhere in the nation, in any country on this planet, an animal that drinks another animal's milk. It is very rare. It is difficult to find, because you won't. What we need to do instead is recognize what is the normal physiology of most humans. And what does that mean? Providing alternatives that suit that necessity. Next slide, please. So what is lactose intolerance? It's the inability to digest lactose. This is a sugar found in dairy products. It's particularly because some of us possess what's known as lactase, the enzyme, and certain genes as we age will be turned off for most people. Those who are able to retain the ability to continue digesting lactose or dairy milk often considered it to be a bit of a mutation, the ability to continue to enjoy certain types of food as a necessity from the climates that they oftentimes grew up in. What I wanted to point to, next slide, please, Joseph. What I wanted to point to, however, is some of the discussion we've had about what are the symptoms that someone is experiencing when they're lactose intolerant. And all of you here have already heard from excellent panelists discussing this, but I myself, when I've met patients in clinics, when I met kids in the community from some of the nonprofits I've been involved in both Detroit and around the country, I get told all the time by Black and brown children that milk makes them feel sick. What does that mean, though? When milk makes you feel sick, is it the runs? Is it a bit of abdominal discomfort? It could be all of the above. And that means that children oftentimes are stigmatized as a result and maybe don't have the resources necessary to describe what it is that they're feeling. You ask any 3 or 4-year-old what's going on, and I promise you they'll give you 5 or 6 different things that aren't the exact root of the problem. It's difficult for us to appreciate that, but it is essential to acknowledge that these symptoms that these children are experiencing can interfere with their ability to engage with classmates, with teachers in the classroom, and allow themselves to continue on in their growth. Cow's milk, it's also has been linked to significant amount of constipation. Now, you may ask, why is it that dairy lactose intolerance may lead to diarrhea? Well, that's one symptom of lactose intolerance. But what have they also found? It found that exposure to dairy milk can cause constipation. And in children around the United States, this is a very common problem. Over 1 in 20 visits to the doctor when a child is growing relates to constipation. So what do we do if we want to resolve constipation? We've got all kinds of medications for that, I promise. But there have been a number of trials called crossover trials that have put children on soy milk and dairy milk and demonstrated how did they look after. And what do you think happened to most of the children that were put on the soy milk group? Nearly 100% in one trial resolved their constipation entirely. Constipation is incredibly distressful. It can cause a number of problems for children and their caretakers. And the mere fact that replacing what the child drinks on a daily basis, the fluid milk alternative, can cause such a dramatic change in the symptoms they're experiencing is something that we should take note of. The final point I'll give, although maybe not something that we focus on as much, is that nearly 2 to 3% of children are actually allergic to cow's milk, which is a separate category than lactose intolerant. But it's something to note as well that we're ignoring a substantial amount of children who, in addition to being unable to digest it, may actually have a serious allergy to it. So why are we talking, though, about dairy in the context of chronic disease? Well, the United States already has 2 leading killers that are related to diet: heart disease that Dotsie talked about, and cancer. And those are also the leading killers of many of our minority communities, particularly African Americans. Those 18 to 49 are nearly twice as likely to die from heart disease than white Americans. 1 in 3 Black men and women will be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime, and nearly 1 in 5 will succumb from their disease. It's also important to note that dairy can exacerbate existing health disparities. An example in children, particularly, especially Black and brown children, is asthma. And according to the EPA, Black children are nearly twice as likely to be hospitalized for asthma and 4 times as likely to die from asthma as other white children. Dairy consumption has been shown to potentially increase the risk of asthma development and even exacerbation of these symptoms. Now, what about heart disease? African Americans, as recent as 2019, were shown to be 30% more likely to die from heart disease than non-Hispanic whites. Heart disease is also very common in most minority groups, including Black Americans, Latinx patients, and patients of South Asian descent. And dairy constitutes large portions of saturated fat and cholesterol, something Dotsie had alluded to earlier. Now, why does saturated fat matter? It's because saturated fat has been shown to have precursors to heart disease, atherosclerosis in particular, stroke, and a number of microvascular complications in the body, many of which are difficult to count even in this conversation. It's essential for us to minimize children's risk of developing heart disease as they age, because I promise you, it's not about preventing children from developing heart disease. It's about reducing the heart disease they already have. And how do we know this? In autopsies of kids as young as 10 years old, we found precursors to heart disease, atherosclerotic plaques. The final one I'll talk about is cancer. And dairy consumption has been linked to a number of cancers, including prostate, breast, ovarian cancers, as well as lung. And in a study that they did in patients with lactose intolerance, they found that 22,788 people, so let's say 23,000 people who had lactose intolerance and were avoiding dairy for the sake of avoiding dairy just because they were uncomfortable, had decreased risk of lung, ovarian, and breast cancers. And those who oftentimes abstain from dairy products often have lower blood pressure, lower risk of cognitive decline, and lower risk of developing Parkinson's disease. Next slide, please. Now, I want to dispel some of the myths that exist regarding the health and necessity of dairy. The first is fractures. Dietary calcium intake has not been found to be associated with risk of fracture. This is nothing new. We've been talking about this for maybe the past few decades. And in a journal article published in Pediatrics, they had found no relation between dairy consumption and calcium consumption and risk of fractures. And there's no clinical trial evidence as well that increased calcium intake from dietary sources prevents fractures. The second thing that's often referred to when it comes to dairy is that low-fat dairy products are helpful foods, and they're often cited to be useful for mitigating childhood obesity risk. But there was a large meta-analysis. You don't have to know what meta-analysis means. I know it's a scary word. It's all the studies we can take, and we put it together, and we look at the evidence that exists. And we found that there was no support that increasing dairy product intake will decrease body fat over a long term. And long term is the key word when we talk about promoting health among our children. The final thing I want to talk about is that large trials have found that total dairy intake has not been associated with a lower risk of total mortality, notwithstanding our previous conversation about some of the issues that come with dairy consumption. So let's talk about soy. Why did we pick soy? Obviously, Dotsie put up an excellent diagram with some of the nutrition facts, and you may have not caught that in time, but I'll tell you that soy milk is the only milk that's available currently that from a plant alternative that meets federally mandated nutritional guidelines. What do we mean by that? We mean that it has equivalent amounts of protein, essential nutrients such as fiber, magnesium, calcium, and other components. And they're incredibly important for substituting what is a major component of a child's daily diet. Another conception that has been popularized is the concern of phytoestrogens, and more particularly isoflavones, which are components found within soy milk. No research we found in the past 20, 30, even up to 100 years has found that isoflavones, or phytoestrogens in particular, have estrogenic effects. In fact, studies have found that those consuming soy have a lower risk of cancer, particularly breast cancer in women, and may have additional benefits for things like menopausal hot flashes, which are oftentimes associated with estrogenic load. The final thing that I'll note about soy is that it's affordable for those who are lactose intolerant. Oftentimes, there's a discussion to be had about what about lactose-free milk. If any of you get the chance to go to your nearby grocery store, I'd highly recommend looking to Lactaid and seeing how much that costs compared to that of soy milk. It is a safe alternative, and more importantly, it's an affordable alternative for all those who require it, especially those who are disadvantaged. Our children and dairy cows deserve better. Lactose intolerant children, particularly minorities, should not be forced to choose between either suffering in school or obtaining critical nutrients in their days. Add Soy is a bill that ensures that all children are provided the option to not only meet the needs of their bodies, but also help build a foundation for a healthier future. Thank you again for those who are here listening, and I think we're happy to take questions now. I'll turn it over to Joseph to continue our facilitation.
Thank you, Dr. Mopuri. I appreciate that very much. And we do have a number of questions in the chat box. So I'll go ahead and read some of those, and the panelists can answer them as they like. The first one from Jane, just to confirm, there is nothing states can do to remove dairy from school mandates. And part two of that question is, are there broader mandates, for example, that foists milk into nursing homes, perhaps notwithstanding the lactose intolerance of patients?
Well, there is somebody on this call, Kathleen Wiley, that's a mom who's been working very hard at her boys' middle school to change things. Yes, there are things that states can do at the state level in government, and there's also a lot of really empowered and passionate parents that seem to get more traction at private or charter schools than they do at their public schools. But there are a lot of folks, a lot of parents fighting just right at the school level for this change.
And I'll say as well to respond to the question, I've been involved down here in Florida to offer plant-based options to children across school lunches here in Florida. And it's a tough fight. I've done the same thing for correctional facility inmates in Maryland to offer plant-based options for them as well. I say plant-based because that includes soy milk as well in this conversation. It's incredibly difficult, I think, on a state-by-state basis, just because of the politics that occur within the state. There's obviously a bit of controversy as it relates to funding and how schools may be able to fund this. And that's why I think it's really important for us to look to the USDA's reimbursement methods currently and look at a larger perspective from a federal background into how we can ensure that this is easy and accessible for school districts, especially disadvantaged school districts, to implement this in their daily habits.
All right, very good. Thank you. Yen addresses the elevation of milk within the dietary guidelines for Americans and observes that it may be unnaturally or unhealthfully placed so highly. Is the fix in with the DGA? What's going on with that, and why do they love milk so much?
Well, let me start on that if I might. I wrote my senior thesis a long time ago in college about the basic four food groups. That was a predecessor of the food pyramid. And my study of the basic four food groups essentially showed that it was kind of a political construction of the ideal diet rather than a nutritionally driven formulation of the best foods to eat. It was basically the most powerful food companies, drove those categories. You were basically told that if you don't draw liberally from each of these four categories, where all the fruits and vegetables, were bunched into one category, you're not going to be healthy. So you had to get your meat products and fish, and then you had to get dairy and cheese. And we heard a very strong critique tonight from DOTSI and also Dr. Mulpuri on dairy. And I think for those of you who, think that milk is great and sound, I think it's important to have this discussion. I just want to remind people, though, that the proposal, HR 1619, which is the ADD SOY Act, and ADD SOY stands for Addressing Dietary Distress in the Stomachs of Our Youth, isn't against dairy. All it does is give an option. I mean, it's not, for the solid foods, the non-fluid foods, we don't just have beef, or we don't just have tofu, we don't just have fish. You get a number of different options on the plate. And I think the ADD SOY Act is simply saying, okay, the dietary guidelines said soy milk is nutritionally equivalent. So we're just taking a policy that's derivative of that supposedly scientific process and say, give kids that choice. When you have perhaps more than half of them getting this milk product on their tray who are lactose intolerant. I mean, it's really just about choice. I don't even understand the argument against it. I mean, should we have a monopoly? Should we have a powerful political interest say we just have beef only? I mean, if the tofu lobby were very powerful, should it just be tofu? No, I mean, you need a variety of options. We should have options in the marketplace. Plant-based milks are 16 or 17% of the offerings that are purchased at our supermarkets and food chains. And it's zero. It's basically zero in our school system. That's just unfair. This is a correction that's way, way overdue here. And just getting back to the question, of course it's political. It's the power of this lobby group, just like we've seen the power of different interest groups really kind of rig the game. I mean, it really is, it's rigged when it comes to this product, and it's been rigged for a long time. And, it has so much momentum and so much inertia. We're not going to see a whole-scale removal of cow's milk from the schools. Maybe it's going to be 10% or 15% or 20% or 25% of kids who are going to choose soy milk. And of course, we're going to be innovating, and we'll see other products emerge in the marketplace. And if they're nutritionally equivalent and they're good on price points, they should be considered as well. And this legislation doesn't stipulate soy. It stipulates essentially a nutritionally equivalent product be offered to the kids so they can have choice.
All right. Thank you, Wayne. I want to say a note, too, that if you're trying to raise your hand, the best way to get heard is to type a question into the Q&A box. Lucky, I'll call you that if you don't mind. You mentioned you see signs of heart disease as early as 10. Eric asks a question. Shouldn't we try to mix ADD SOY philosophy in with the SNAP program of the Department of Health and Human Services to get these kids off milk even earlier?
I think that's a great question, Eric, I believe. I think Wayne and Dotsie have covered this topic in a way that I myself have not truly considered. And I'm actually from the city of Detroit, and from a very early age was able to see health disparities on a large scale in ways that many people in the United States would be shocked to see. And what I'll tell you is that we are making it difficult for people of color, particularly in disadvantaged communities, to be empowered to improve their health. What we need to do is remove barriers to access. And with that comes health literacy, with that comes nutritional literacy, and the abilities to ensure that this is involved in people's daily lives. I can't go into a disadvantaged community and say everybody here should be drinking milk that makes them feel better when there's nowhere to find it. This talking about grocery stores, convenience stores, corner stores, or school lunches. And so I agree with you entirely that we need to have a broader look at to how dairy is currently being reimbursed, and more importantly, how we can have soy milk available in different avenues, such as the SNAP program, WIC-approved foods as well, and improving the access overall. But yeah, I think it goes hand in hand. As to the actual policy, that's above my pay grade. But I will say that I think it's a good idea and one that we should continue to be working towards.
Well, let me just say that the WIC program, Women, Infants, and Children, the USDA has now proposed some plant-based options. So there is more choice. So as a matter of kind of consistency, if it's good enough in the home, it should be good enough in the school system as well.
And I also think, too, to just piggyback off Wayne, the idea of providing choice is the most fundamental American right for individuality. And we're just reflecting economic trends as they exist in the United States by providing a product that's already demanded at 10% of the market and continuously growing to children who never have been given the opportunity to choose and are now being given some degree of agency in their health during the day, and more importantly, their ability to feel good.
All right. And as we come up close to the top of the hour, be aware we'll continue answering questions. If you need to hop off, all questions will be answered in the recording, but we'll trudge right ahead. So far, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine has sued the USDA several times, says Mohan. Do you think that's a strategy that may eventually succeed to get them to adjust their priorities in setting nutritional guidelines?
Well, I'm not sure. I'd have to take a look at the legal theory. What we do know is that the milk mandate is codified to a significant degree, and it's also in regulation. Now, I think the USDA has latitude. I think it has room to maneuver, and there are obviously civil rights laws and civil rights imperatives that the USDA needs to pay attention to as well. I mean, the idea that somehow a political decision was made to put one product on every kid's tray, and if that product causes illness, we're just going to continue to do it. That doesn't make sense to me. I mean, we took peanuts, off of planes, and we have dealt with a lot of other allergies that certain foods, deliver to people. I mean, milk has all this hype. I mean, we've just been brainwashed for so many years about all the great nutritional properties. And again, there'll be a lot of really smart people who differ with my view in that regard. But I think it's important to have this debate and to take an honest look at the science. And on lactose intolerance, it feels to me a matter of settled science. And if you have this percentage of kids who are lactose intolerant, you should give them a choice. I mean, it just feels like you're being a bully. Otherwise, it's a political bullying job is what's going on right now.
Yeah. One of our listeners, Kathleen, says that when she volunteers at her boys' middle school, she puts out milk cartons and most of them, 40 are thrown away. When she puts out soy, only about 9 are thrown away. So that goes right to what you're saying, Wayne, that when kids are given a choice, oftentimes they'll make the right choice. Dr. Lucky, Debbie asks if you would speak to the environmental contaminants that bioaccumulate in the fat the mammary glands of cows and thus their milk, and thus one would assume into the stomachs of humans?
That's a great question. One of the things that we don't often talk about with dairy milk is that it comes from an animal. And from anybody who's spent some time in a biology class, we learn that things tend to concentrate, accumulate, especially in animals. So pollutants that occur in the environment tend to concentrate upwards towards animals. And we do, in fact, have some of those pollutants in the dairy milk that we consume. Another thing I wanted to address as well is the estrogenic components that are present within cow's milk. Oftentimes we talk about estrogen and the fears we have about soy milk, but estrogen comes from lactating animals. It's a completely normal aspect of cow's milk, and it's meant to help a baby calf grow. Estrogen is a very powerful molecule for helping to induce cell growth and cell multiplication, which is why it's problematic for cancers. So many of the contaminants that we may observe in the environment, along with the natural hormones in cows, are problematic for us in children. And although there's no large-scale studies that have really demonstrated that estrogen may have hormonal impacts in humans, we do know that researchers are looking at estrogen in dairy milk and the impact it may have on children's health and adults' health through its ability to induce cancer tumor growth.
Right,
I would also,
thank you,
Lucky,
go ahead.
Lucky, I just want to say that I think, over time, there would be more risks of bioaccumulation.
Of course.
With these cows, they're often killed at 4 or 5 years of age. So I think that's a little bit of a hedge to minimize some of that. These animals have a life expectancy of 15 to 20 years, but we've engineered them through selective breeding to have this enormous output of milk where they've got to be milked 3 times a day, and the cows are producing up to 25,000 pounds of milk a year, contrasting with the cows decades ago who may have been producing 6,000 pounds of milk a year. Those physiological effects on the cow are substantial, but it would seem, because they're so young, that some of those environmental risks might be mitigated to a degree.
Of course. And I'd say another thing too, that's a great point, Wayne. Some of the inputs that cows receive, the food that they're fed, is not at all suitable for what a cow should be eating. And that in many ways tends to lead to disease among cows, improper health, and in many ways that can be passed on to humans. And there's all kinds of research that looks at the amount of antibiotics that we provide to farm animals and cows in particular, and the impact that may have on humans' exposure to bacteria and viruses that have developed in these very concentrated feeding operations, CAFOs. So I think that's a good point, Wayne. Unfortunately, it's maybe a strategy by the dairy industry, but nevertheless, it's probably important to look into more.
And I just want to say, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but this checkoff program that Dotsie mentioned, where you take a certain amount of money for the 100 weight of cow's milk, and then it goes into a federal kitty that the USDA kind of administers with this appointed milk board. They're promoting policies that have led to a dramatic reduction in the number of dairy farms in the United States. I mean, we've lost more than 90% of dairies in the US, small family farms, where there's at least a little bit more animal husbandry, right? The notion of husbandry is tending and care. When you have a facility in the Panhandle of Texas with 19,000 cows, there's no husbandry going on there. Right. I mean, that is a talking about a meta issue. That's a meta population management issue.
Right.
It's individualized care is impossible at that scale, except in the rarest of cases. And I just don't think that this checkoff program and all the marketing has benefited dairy farmers. I mean, I talk to politicians, and Vermont has lost so many farmers. California, went from tens of thousands to, I don't know, it's 9,000. I think the total number of dairy farmers is like 29,000, whereas there are 550,000 soybean farmers in the US. So by, having a soy derivative essentially, more actively put in front of consumers, you're actually helping a lot more farmers potentially, because the number of people involved in that category of production is so vastly larger.
All right. Okay, good. Thank you. I think that's a great answer by both of you on that. Alexis, yes, I will share Dotsie's graphic comparing soy to cow's milk that will be in the recording. And I will get a link to that put up on our website and share that in the outbound email as well. Dotsie, I'm going to turn this question to you. Danya asks, what can she do to make a difference in her community on this?
Well, I think join us. We are going to need a wave, a tsunami of support from organizations and from individuals. So email us after this is over, and there's a couple of ways that you can get involved in the support efforts. But I think in your community is education. I'm seeing just over and over again, we're seeing a confusion about soy, I want to call it, because 20 years ago, dairy started spinning that, trying to make us believe that soy was unhealthy, when the healthiest populations on planet Earth, main food source is soy and tofu, in places like Japan and Okinawa. And so I think that the education is really critical. And I think it's important to note that, and we did mention this for a hot second, but we worked really hard in 2019 to get soy included in the dietary guidelines of Americas for 2020, right? It was not included. There was no alternative to cow's milk. And we pushed and pushed, and throughout efforts of a lot of different organizations, we got that done. And that was first step to add soy, because we're not going to be able to get something like an alternative milk into the school systems if the dietary guidelines have not said, yes, it's nutritionally equivalent. It's almost exactly macro nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk. So now that has happened, we say it's soy milk because they did it themselves, right? It's the DGA answers to the USDA. And so we say that soy milk is the answer. And I get questions all the time, and I'm sure you will too in your community. People are, well, what about all the milks, all the plant milks? There's so many more. I like almond milk, I like oat milk, I like flaxseed milk, and they're all delicious. But I think it's important to note that comes from a position of privilege, quite frankly. And the other milks, these children, as Dr. Lucky mentioned, may not get dinner when they go home, right? So we actually have to provide something that has a really sound nutrition basis at every meal. And if you were to offer something like oat milk, which is incredibly delicious, it has almost no protein. Coconut milk is almost 40% fat. So that would be doing a great disservice to our young people's hearts, right? As Dr. Lucky talked about. You have really niche milks, like maybe pea milk or flaxseed milk or other milks that the affordability is just not there. There's literally nothing cheaper on planet Earth than a soybean. Pretty much, it's hard to find. Maybe rice. So rice milk, another delicious, love it cold on my cereal, almost no protein. So the education is really important. It really, really is on how delicious and affordable and healthy soy milk is and why it was chosen.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Dotsie. A question, do we have a study about the environmental difference if people switch to soy and how much better the deforestation problem would be? Dotsie, I think you had a report on that, or am I recalling another individual who's part of our cadre?
Well, let me just say, well, I'm sure Dotsie has an observation there. Most soy is raised and fed to animals who then inefficiently convert that plant matter into animal protein. So I think Dotsie's correct that soy is relatively inexpensive in terms of production. And in terms of soy milk, it's basically, soy and water and whatever the supplements are that are added to it. We've had a big problem with raising rainforests to create soy farms in Brazil, soybean farms, in order to feed those soybeans mainly to animals. So I'm not one who says soy is the greatest thing in the world in all cases. It's not. I mean, there are benefits and there are demerits to almost all these products. But if you look at it on balance, and I think that the reason that the ADD SOY Act, HR 1619, has been introduced is that it's just tracking from the American dietary guidelines. It's not really looking at all of the metrics on environment and water use and lots of other important things. That's important for us to engage in as a policy discussion. Unfortunately, our Farm Bill, which is coming up in this 118th Congress, we sidestep so many of these questions, and we are promoting these different agricultural universes, mainly a few preferred commodities. And milk is certainly one that just gets benefit after benefit. And frankly, even though with all those benefits, it's still been hard for a lot of dairy farmers. I mean, so many of them have gone out of business. And I think it's not because the views of DOTSI or Dr. Malpuri have won. It's because the folks who are at the National Milk Producers Federation and the other trade associations have been supporting policies that have driven consolidation and an increase in size in these farms. And the family farmers have been left behind. And there's been tremendous dislocation in rural America. It's not just milk production. It's also been in the pig sector, and it's been in the egg sector. And it's a larger problem in agriculture. Sometimes these trade associations, which tout their great defense of the farmer, have been the agent of incredible consolidation and loss of family farming in the U.S.
And not to overstep as well. I've met with a few farmers, particularly minority farmers, and one of the things that became particularly notable to me is that many of these farm lobbies and agricultural lobbies tend to skew more towards the animal product lobbies because they have a considerable say in the conversation. So, even those who may be producing fresh produce or soybeans or some of the other inputs for some of the plant-based products that exist, they don't have as big of a say in the direction that maybe advocacy and subsidization goes. And one more point as well is that I read somewhere that it was over 75%, or maybe I think 77 or so was of soybean development is specifically for animal products. I think human consumption is maybe 6% or so. So, not to answer your question indirectly, but it's difficult to assess, what soy milk increases in soy milk demand would do on, a number of environmental factors. But I think it puts into perspective just how much is wasted in the course of the development of a carton of dairy milk that goes on a school kid's tray.
All right, very good. Thank you, Lucky. I appreciate that. We are running more over than I thought we would, which is both great news and sad news. It's great news because it shows that this is really an important topic to people. So I really thank everyone for tuning in. I'm going to give you my email address right here, and I'll put it in. You'll have it in the email I send out. It's just simply joseph@animalwellnessaction.org. If we didn't get to your question today, please email it to me. I'll circulate it among the folks and try and get an answer to you. And then I will have some assets also in there. But this is a great issue. Very grateful for Dr. Lucky, for DOTSI, for Wayne, for Representative Carter to have joined us. And certainly we're grateful to you who have tuned in to listen. One of the best things you can do right now is when you get this email, there'll be a link. Use it and encourage your congressional representative to co-sponsor this bill. We need support on it. And certainly while you're on animalwellnessaction.org, sign up for our newsletters if you're not getting them. And I would encourage you, because we love DOTSI, to go to Switch for Good and follow her there. And Dr. Lucky, you can go to Plants Nourish and find him other places as well. So with all of that, with repeated thanks to our guests, to our attendees, and to Amy, who helped produce this, we'll close it down for the night with an immense expression of gratitude to all parties involved. Thank you so much and have a good night.